Well, of course, in those days, people were very much against it. Everyone in the valley was dead set against it.
Yup, check. Massachusetts is a state that is notable for its natural beauty, from the Berkshires of the far west to the beaches of Cape Cod. That being said, one of our more notable features in the central western portion of the state is not actually natural at all. The largest inland body of water in the state, and the fourth largest in New England, the Quabbin Reservoir, is just less than a century old. So how did this man-made giant body of water come to be? Well, in the 1920s and 30s, the city of Boston, Massachusetts, faced a serious problem. They were running out of clean water to drink, probably because they dumped too much tea into it. The solution to the problem by the government was to flood 4 quiet farm towns of western Massachusetts in order to create a freshwater reservoir. You may find yourself asking, why would they do that? But it does make some sense, given the geography of those towns. They were located in the valley surrounding the Swift River, better known at the time as the Swift River Valley, believe it or not. The river cut through all 4 of these towns, and the valley provided an easy way to make a man-made reservoir, as all it would take was the construction of 2 dams in the southern end of the valley in order to flood the towns and create the water supply that would eventually hold 412 billion gallons of clean water for those pesky Bostonians. The term Quabbin actually comes from a local Native American language in which the word Quabbin means land of many waters. Legend has it that there was a short period before the completion of the reservoir where the people in Boston were forced to brew their Dunkin' Donuts coffee with salt water from the ocean. That's a joke. Dunkin' Donuts didn't open until like 20 years after this. The residents of these 4 towns, Dana, Enfield, Prescott, and Greenwich or Greenwich, I've heard it pronounced both ways. I know the one in Connecticut is pronounced Greenwich. Anyway, the residents of these places were none too pleased hearing that the towns that they loved and had lived in for generations were going to be lost underwater in order to serve some parched cosmopolitans 85 miles east. I'd love to tell you that there was some great rebellion and the citizens of the Swift River Valley rose up and took their towns back from the government, but sadly that is not the case. The attitude of these displaced people seemed to be largely despair as opposed to anger.
I've been asked if people were angry about this losing their property and the takeover. They weren't angry. They weren't angry people. They were simply heartbroken.
This is only slightly relevant, but upon researching, I also realized that David Foster Wallace's Infinite Jest takes place in a fictional town called Enfield, Massachusetts, which is one of the towns that was flooded. I have not read that particular novel, and I don't know what to take from that, but it's a cool Easter egg for any of you literature heads out there. The few months before the flooding began in 1938 saw the deconstruction of some of the oldest and most beautiful buildings in the country. Not only that, but over 7,000 bodies were taken from graves in the valley and moved into a cemetery in Ware, in which several memorials were erected for those people who had to have their corpses so rudely relocated. A slight derailment came September of that same year when an extremely powerful hurricane came through New England and left 50 billion broad feet of timber blown down in the basin that was to be flooded. However, the reservoir finally reached its capacity of, as I mentioned, 412 billion gallons on June 22nd, 1946, after 7 years of filling. That's how big this thing is. That's how fucking big it is. 7 years. The reservoir has not been without controversy since then, however. There's a plan to dump a bunch of timber rattlesnakes on an island in the middle of the Quabbin. Was shot down in 2017. The 2020 Senate race saw Joe Kennedy III try to malign his competitor Ed Markey by saying that Markey was neglecting to serve the needs of the towns of Dana, Prescott, Enfield, and Greenwich. Ed Markey's campaign manager, John Walsh, responded to this by saying, "For a campaign that's underwater itself, you'd think they would be more sensitive to the memory of those towns." Holy shit, that's fucking brutal. Needless to say, Kennedy lost that race. It's extremely refreshing to see that this reservoir still, to this day, decades later, is causing a bunch of problems for those airhead bureaucrats way out in Boston. Though gone forever, these towns have achieved a legendary status among the ranks of local history and have become far more famous than they likely would have been had they all still stood today. On top of that, the increasing threat of climate change means that Boston might be getting a taste of their own medicine in the not-so-distant future, being lost to the sea. On the final evening, before everyone was forced to evacuate their respective towns, the Enfield Town Hall held a concert and party, allowing the residents of the town and valley as a whole to leave their homes with some good memories of good times, as well as their melancholiness. Legend has it that when the clock struck midnight on April 28th, the band performed Old Lang Syne, and the four towns were officially dissolved. I'd like to finish this off with a quote from Walter E. Clark from his book Quabbin Reservoir, Memories of Conditions That Existed in the Swift and Ware River Valleys While Quabbin Reservoir Was Being Developed. It's a fucking mouthful. Let us all treasure our past associations with these places that are no more, and ever bear in mind that it is possible, because of the gift of memory, to have roses in January. My name's Tom Fisher. I'm from Western Mass, and I'm still bitter about this. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.